Brilliant. There you go. Right. So everybody, we're going to start with a really, hopefully, in-depth news roundup of what's been going on either in your areas over the course of last week on active travel, but also I'm sure there are some people, and I know Adrian, I think you want to come in on the announcements on Sunday and the sort of continued war against what we like to see of on active travel. And then we've got Mark, Ranty Highwayman, giving us a presentation around the user experience. So that's the plan. The news roundup will take about 20 minutes on and then over to our speakers. Don't forget, we will share presentations after the session. So that's the plan for the next hour and 10 minutes. Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to kick us off with our news roundup. Kathy, that was quick off the mark. Brilliant work. Come in, please.
Yeah, just following on from last week when I said I was going to be on the Bikes on Trams trial. So that happened yesterday morning, and I posted something in the chat, but Dame Sarah Storey was there and we got on a tram and we went along on the tram and then we came back again and the world didn't end. It was great because after 30 years of trying to campaign for this, it was just really easy to do. So I'm just hoping the rest of the trial goes really well and that we get a positive outcome from this because it's so accessible just being able to wheel your bike onto a tram compared with using the trains. So fingers crossed.
Thanks, Kathy. That's brilliant. Obviously, because I'm in Greater Manchester along with you, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? And yeah. You know, for a small but very passionate group of us, it's quite an emotional moment.
It was, and I mean, I hadn't realised quite how much I'd be photographed in taking part in this inaugural bit of the trial, but it was just really great, and the whole vibe around the morning was really positive. So, you know, we would question about how it had been for us, but quite frankly, it just like we did it. It really was no big deal. So there you go.
Amazing, brilliant. Thanks, Kathy. How exciting. Bikes on Trams. Right, we're going to come to, this is always a deep breath moment, everybody. H, is your kit working? Are you going to come through loud and clear?
It is. I was just going to comment on Kathy's thing. I just put that in the chat. It's actually, I've got a picture of Roger Geppin with his bike on a Manchester tram about 6 years ago. They were always going on trams, and about 15 years ago, I did a paper with GMCC, and we totally shot to pieces every argument they put. But it's taken a long time, and what's been very good has been the fact that we've done it in a pilot phase where they can dip their toe in the water and feel it. We did the same with DOR, and I'm just chasing Louise Cheeseman now, because she's now in charge of the bus and ground transport strategy in London. So there's a good hope there that we can do more with bikes. So there's some good stuff. We're having fun with our LEZ and parking going up and people dodging the LEZ. So there's when you have these things, people have to make a change, and it's very interesting to watch. So thanks very much for that, Steve. It's great to see the tram start. I was going to be in Manchester tonight, but I missed the train times, so I'm staying here.
Fair enough, H. Otherwise, Manchester would have braced, ready for your arrival on a tram. You probably would have arrived in the peak, at which point the bike on the tram thing, I don't think is quite loud, but anyway. Brilliant. Thanks, H. Amy, over to you.
Yeah, two things. One is the consultation in Surrey on their draft Vision Zero strategy. And what's interesting about that consultation is you can see everybody else's responses. So I put the link in to find it there. It closes just on the 24th. So please do respond if you walk or ride there. And then the other good news is from London, where the London Assembly Police and Crime Committee has published their report on serious injury collision investigation. And we were worried when they rushed it out, we thought, but it's a really good report, very strong. Talks about reviewing training, quality assurance, also calling for an action plan. And so important, it talks about reviewing no further action decisions. That's fantastic. We also talk about introducing a survey, but that won't be for next year. So the campaign groups are going to try and introduce a survey, and we'll be reporting back more on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. That's brilliant to hear. Brilliant roundup. Okay, and next we've got Brendan. You've got your hand up.
Yes, hi. A couple of things. I'm afraid I wasn't here the last couple of weeks, so I don't know, did someone talk about what's happening in Edinburgh, the city's announced plans for major change in the last week or two?
I don't. I'm seeing blank faces.
Okay, unless anyone
David,
else from
I'll come to
Edinburgh is there.
David. David, I'll come to you in just a moment on that because I can see your finger up. But Brendan, assume that we don't know.
Okay, so
you can enlighten us.
the council has produced, I think it's 600 pages of analysis on transport across the city centre and announced kind of very dramatic plans really to chase Paris and Amsterdam, which if delivered will be magnificent. There was a Spokes, the local cycling lobby group meeting with the transport chair from the council and Laura Laker, and basically they were all singing its praises. And it's going to start, I think, this summer with the temporary closure of the Cowgate, which if you know Edinburgh, it's a narrow, low-down street that's very, very busy. And if that succeeds, it will not be reopened again. And we're heading for potentially most of the old town, Edinburgh Old Town, being closed to through traffic. So cars will still be allowed, but it's a really, really big deal. Locally certainly, but also possibly nationally, given Edinburgh is the second most visited city in Britain. Part of that plan, though, was about what they're going to do with the second or the new tram line, north-south tram line. And there's a major local controversy about the proposal, which was at first that the line would go along the track of a former railway, which is currently one of the best loved and used active travel corridors. There's been uproar about that, although the cycling lobby is quite divided because some say that you could run a cycle track alongside the tram there, and others are saying that the tram ought to take space exclusively from cars and leave that beautiful natural corridor in place. So there's a public meeting about that. There's a consultation open at the moment, and a public meeting in the Edinburgh Festival of Cycling late May, early June about that very issue. It's called the Roseburn Cycle Path and the Roseburn route. And so the council has basically backed off a bit and said that they will now put in the consultation two equal alternatives, one of which is wholly on road. But it's interesting how it's divided cyclists, basically. That's number one. Number two, those of you who keep a sharp eye on the news may have seen on Saturday that a beer bike was seized in Leith Walk. A transit van-sized bicycle with 10 people on it, run by a company which operates in numerous other UK cities and Europe. And the guy who founded it has come over from North America. On an all-you-can-drink basis. So you've got one sober driver and 10 drunks. And it's the police have seized the vehicle, and it was all over the newspapers here. But what's interesting really is they've not said why. And there are, at least 10 different possible reasons that I and others have thought of it. There's quite an interesting debate going on. But I have just suggested an hour ago and got accepted with the guy who runs the Edinburgh Festival of Cycling that we hold a debate about that, because it's particularly interesting because there's a lot of the legal fringes of what is a bicycle and what is allowable that haven't ever been tested. There are no precedents. How wide can it be? How long can it be? How many passengers can it have? What weight can it be? And so on and so on. So it's going to be extremely legally interesting. The police, if you go by the records of other traffic offences, may hold on to this £10,000 bike for a year, which won't please the owners of it. But it's something to watch, I think, and we're hoping that this debate will be streamed as well for precedents as to what will be allowed in other cities around the country. Because last sentence from me, it seems that if we want cities which move heavily towards active travel and cycling, there is no alternative but to allow bigger, larger pedal-powered vehicles. So what are the limits on that? And I, for one, would really, really like to know. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brendan. Wow. the one short update, lots to think about there. I'm having struggling to move on, particularly from beer bikes. I think I'm wondering whether we need a special active travel cafe session on beer bikes just to really unpack all the questions that throws up. Really exciting though.
Could I
news
just
from
jump in
Edinburgh
there? And this suggestion of a debate or an event has just been made. We could make them one and the same thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it.
Brilliant. Let's definitely talk about that. That's fascinating. David, do you want to jump in before I go to H?
Thanks. So just to say that this time last Tuesday, we had the inaugural parliamentary walk, which we've organised through the APPG, and I'd had a chat about a year ago with Ruth Cadbury, who said we have this annual cycle ride, but why not have an annual walk to show off the sort of best and worst of the walking environment? So despite the pouring rain, we had a great crowd. We had 5 MPs, about 5 peers, Will Norman, Adam Tranter, the main active travel cabinet members, Paul de Moldenberg, Rosina Chowdhury, Adam Harrison in the area, and walked from Waterloo, where Rosina Chowdhury told us about the great plans for improving the environment of the station, went on to the Strand Piazza, where we saw this fabulous new space that really is a model for where everybody could be, pedestrianised, took out traffic from a major road without any impact really on traffic movement, went through the pedestrianised Covent Garden, which has really done so much to increase footfall income, and ended up at the Crown Estate offices, where they and Westminster told us about their vision for greening and pedestrianising large parts of Regent Street. So it's really successful, and it really showed that how important walking is as part of active travel and what you can do to improve the pedestrian environment and get people walking. So we're looking forward to something even bigger and better next year.
David, that's wonderful. Also gives us a glimmer of hope, enlightened thinking in Westminster.
Yeah, well, the new council has to be, Paul de Moldenberg and the Labour Council obviously feel cautious, and they're starting from a much lower base than Camden or Islington. But they are trying to get there. And obviously, Paul de Moldenberg is an enthusiastic pedestrian. And let's hope we're hoping that they'll start taking action on St Martin's Lane soon. So they have got schemes in progress. And let's just hope they're sort of brave enough to carry it forward.
Thanks, David. Brilliant stuff. Okay, H, I'm going to come to you very briefly because you've already had a slot. I'm assuming it's a response to the breaking news around stolen beer bikes. H, you there?
Yeah. Oh, bugger.
Yeah.
I took, because I'm on the.
No, it's classic H technical moment there. I'll come back to you in a second, H. Is it A Kelly? Is that for Adam, Adrian?
Sorry, yeah, it's
Andrew?
Adam Kelly. I did hear your request earlier to check. I can't work out how to change my name on Zoom. I don't know where the config is for that. Apologies. Yeah, I'm over in Wiltshire, but I sit on the border with Bath and North East Somerset. So a small piece of news to do with that. My wife has organised a playing out event at Freshford School in Bath and North East Somerset on Friday. Anyone who's in that area, it'd be great to have your support. And then a couple of slightly smaller news points on that route that I normally traverse between Wiltshire and Freshford. There is a road closure I mentioned, I think, a week or two ago, going on for 5 months, which is fantastic. Essentially created a 5-month low traffic neighbourhood. I'm trying to use that to create a permanent one, and having a lot of difficulties with getting the road classification changed, which is a C road. I've raised that with the council, not getting anywhere with that, but I'd love to know anyone's attempts at changing road classifications, preferably down, to get low traffic neighbourhoods. And then a slightly even smaller piece of news, I visited Cambridge for the first time on a bike over the weekend to actually purchase a triplet tandem. And I was massively impressed by the cycle infrastructure. I'm very jealous by the cycle infrastructure in Cambridge. So kudos to everyone at Cam Cycle and Co and neighbouring organisations who've been involved with that. I was really impressed with it. But I did have some problems, even in wonderful Cambridge, with barriers on particularly the guided busway and some of the other paths, which are just not designed for a triplet. And really sympathise with people on bigger bikes, particularly people who are disabled potentially, trying to get through some of those barriers. So something to improve on for the future.
Fabulous, thanks for that, and kudos on the tricycle, the triplet tricycle, whatever it is. It's amazing.
Yeah, my children, I got a GSD cargo bike. My two boys have almost outgrown that. It's constant fighting on the back. So triplet is the next
work
forward.
Good work. Okay, I'm going to attempt to go back to H in a second. Quick explainer though, for anybody who wants to know. When you see your little picture on Zoom, at the top left, top right, there are 3 dots. And if you click on there, on your picture on Zoom, 3 dots, click on there, you can rename yourself. Easy as that. Right, H, I think you put your hand in the air as if you'd won a technical battle, and we're all hoping that you have.
Yeah, well, I'm working off the Android, so it's quite difficult. On licensing and beer bikes in Scotland, the Road Scotland Acts, we treated bike hire as street trading and required them to have a license. And so beer bikes, commercial use of bikes on the road and such like can be treated as street trading under Section 97 of the Road Scotland Act. So in Scotland, we have nice laws. So we can do that. We might treat it as a large motor car with more than 8 seats as well, and treat it as the Public Passenger Vehicles Act licensing. It doesn't specify what needs to power your bus, and some buses are actually powered by steam. So we've got around that one. Just another one on the Cambridge busway. It's still been closed for 2 years after the cyclist was killed by a 56-mile-an-hour bus, because there's no separation between the cycleway and the 56-mile-an-hour bus lanes. And somebody clipped the curb and fell in front of a bus. I don't know what progress is on that, but it's still closed, I think. And I think we must be due a health and safety executive report on this.
So I was using that over the weekend, so it definitely was open, but it was a thought that crossed my mind. Those buses do go fast along there. And you're right, there's no separation.
Great. I'm conscious of time, and we've got Mark to come, Ranty Highwayman, but thank you very much, everybody. Does anybody, before we move on and get Mark to present, does anybody want to do a quick explainer about the announcement on Sunday that I think was quite significant? Anybody want to do a quick? Yep, Adrian, did you put your hand up? I thought I saw you volunteer there. Come on in.
I can do something on the 20 miles an hour bit. I'll refrain from doing anything on the LTN side. The couple of really important things to remember. One is that we are in an election year, so everything that is done between now and the election is about getting votes out. It's nothing to do with what's right or wrong. The second thing to notice about the 20 mile an hour guidance is that it is guidance, as implied by the name. It is not the law. The law has not changed. And in particular, in paragraph 33, there is a statement that local authorities must fully consider the needs of vulnerable road users. Everything else, apart from that paragraph, is subservient to that. So there are a few bits of nonsense in there. There's 2 or 3 or maybe 4 assertions which are made without any evidence at all. For example, they say that journey times will be longer, but they don't bring any evidence about that. And we know from practical experience that journey times are hardly ever longer with 20 miles an hour. They also say that there is more pollution with 20 miles an hour, and we know that is wrong. So there are 1 or 2 interesting things. There are some useful clarifications. It says very clearly the law is the law, and local authorities have got to comply with it, and this is guidance only. We think really there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in here, and we don't really see anything changing. For those local authorities that want to continue to implement 20 miles an hour and make their places better places to be, then they'll continue to do that. For those local authorities that don't want to do that, well, they won't do it anyway. So we don't really see much changing here. I'm very happy to answer any specific questions that on it though.
No, that's perfect, Adrian. That's really good, quick explainer. And I think you're absolutely spot on in that it's electioneering, pure and simple. What's really fascinating now is there's polls already emerging showing how frustrated people are with the talk of this stretching on until November or even January and losing the will to live if we have another 6 months of this nonsense. But thank you very much. I am going to move us on. And do please remember, Active Travel Cafe is a bipartisan, non-party political environment. But yes, our cabinet is a load of drunks driven by one sober driver. Actually, not that sober. I'm going to move us on. Mark, Ranty Highwayman, are you ready to present to us around the user experience?
I am. Let me
Brilliant.
share and see how we go.
And obviously, please do explain what you've done to yourself.
Right, so let me just get set up here. So yeah, I'll just pull a thing out of my industry. When a contractor leads on a meeting, quite often they have what's called a safety moment. And for me, like Denzel there, I messed with the shelf at the weekend, put one up for a friend, then immediately forgot I'd put it up and hit my head on it. So there you go. And that's why I've got a plaster there. You may laugh as much as you like. It was quite funny. So tonight, slightly extended version, we're going to look at user experience. What I'd say before I go into this, a thank you to Ross Atkin. I don't know if he's managed to get on tonight, but we've been talking behind the scenes about a couple of bits and pieces on this. This is quite a new area for me, so I'm by no means at all an expert or specialist. So you're learning with me as we go along. So let's see where we get to. Let's start the Wikipedia definition, which I will read out this time. The user experience is how a user interacts with and experiences a product, system, or service. It includes a person's perceptions of utility, ease of use, and efficiency. Probably quite a lot in there to absorb, but we'll move on and hopefully we can pick a bit of this up as we go through it. So I did, when I trailed this on social media, tell you that I was going to now show you something that you're never going to unsee. And this is it. So here are some photos of doors, my office to be exact. And what you have here is two sides of the same door. And what we can see on both sides of the same door is exactly the same handle. Keep that in your head. Here is two sides of another door to my kitchen in the office. We have two different things going here. So on the left, there is a definite handle. And on the right, there is a push plate. And that's quite important. So we're going to talk about the Norman door. So what we're saying here is basically where we get a door wrong. Professor Don Norman, there's his book on the right-hand side. I've probably been reading it or trying to read it for about 8 months. It's very, very dense. But he's talking about human-centered design, essentially. So let's go back a minute. So just get that into your head. So here's a door, same handle on both sides. Here's a door, handle on one side, push plate on the other side. If your door is giving out the wrong usability signals, we call it a Norman door. How can people get doors wrong? But they do. At the bottom there, there is a URL to a really, really good video which sums this up, which if you get a second, just scribble that down. Otherwise, I'll put that on Twitter after the session. It's about 5 minutes long, well worth a look. So my secure door into the office here is a Norman door. And the reason it's a Norman door is if you go up to this and you want to open it, the handle tells you to pull, as simple as that. Pulling that door from one of those sides, the one on the left, it will not open because you actually have to push this particular door. So here is a door with good discoverability. And discoverability is as you approach the thing that you're going to use in some way, you kind of already understand how it's going to be used. So on the left, that means pull. On the right, that means push. It's the kind of thing that we probably pick up at a very early age on how stuff works more generally. Doesn't really matter what's happening on the left there in terms of the shape of the handle and the rest of that. If you pull that handle, you know the door's going to open. It gets more complicated if your handle is horizontal and it's across the entire width of the door, because you don't really know which way the hinges are. There is a bar in, I think it is in The Hague, who have on purpose put the handles and things all the way wrong way around because it gives the barman a laugh. So there you go. Norman doors, that's now going to stick with you. So while we're thinking of discoverability, let's look at a couple of hobs here. These are just random off the internet being sold at the moment. So the problem is, if you go to switch on a hob, and I can't see any hands here, so you'll have to kind of think amongst yourself and maybe put it in the chat. How many people go to hob and think, oh, hang on a minute, now how did this work? One on the left is probably slightly better because you've got little twist knobs there, but you're going to have to go in there close and look at the little tiny pictures to work out which knob turns which hob on. Maybe it's logically placed down the right-hand side, but it's not particularly discoverable. The one on the right-hand side is potentially worse to some extent because you've got the 4 little buttons down the bottom here. Then you've got a plus and minus to control the heat. So any jam makers in the room will have massive problems with this particular one because you can't just get the heat up and down finely and quickly. You're probably going to want to use one on the left once you've learned which knob to twist there. Discoverability. So if we look at something with good discoverability, we should be able to understand quickly what it does, how the operations work. 2 sides to this coin. The second side is when we actually use the thing, we should be getting some feedback to realize or understand that the thing is working as we expected. I could not find the image on the right anywhere. I'd even tried AI to generate this, but I've had to doctor it. I've put the 4 little twist knobs at the bottom there in the same pattern as the hobs appear in front of us. That is something which has good discoverability because we can go up to it. We realize, well, actually, the top left one runs the top left hob. And we know if we turn it to the right, generally speaking, we've learned this, that one's going to get hotter. And if we turn it right to the right, it's going to get the hottest. So there's our feedback. We're turning the knob and the hob is going to glow, heat up, whatever it does. A couple of other concepts just to bring in, a little bit harder to work with. But we'll talk about the concept of affordance. And again, back to Don Norman, affordances represent the possibilities in the world for how the agent, that's a person, animal, machine, whatever, can interact with something. Quite interesting that he picked machine back in the day when he wrote this definition, because that's pretty much before we had AI and some of the automation we've got now. So he was kind of predicting what might happen in the future. But essentially, as you walk up to a thing to go and use it, as you're getting there, the idea of an affordance is you kind of start to understand how this thing's going to work. So unlike Mr. Don and Mr. George in the photo, as you approach a sofa, you're pretty sure that you're going to go and sit on it or you lie on it because of its shape and how it's comfy and all the rest of it. You probably don't go and lean forward on a Thursday to watch TV as they did. The younger viewers may not know who those two are, so look up the Scottish TV comedy Absolutely, and maybe you'll find Mr. Don and Mr. George. We also have signifiers. Again, this is getting a little bit more complex here. So again, back to Don Norman, affordances determine what actions are possible. So we see a chair, well, you can sit on it, you can lie on it, you can lean across it on a Thursday. The signifier is something that communicates where the action should take place. And he says we need both. So for example, you go up to your computer, get the mouse, and you can see the little hand or the arrow on the screen. So the mouse is your affordance. The signifier is the little hand or arrow pointing at stuff, telling you that stuff's going to happen. And there's H on the right-hand side there, trying to get his IT to work. Sorry, H. So yeah, the last two are a little bit more complex, and it's kind of, this is where my learning has got to so far. Quite hard to keep in your mind because it can come across as a bit abstract. So can we apply some of this to streets? Let's see. So here's the humble push button. Maybe the push button itself is the affordance. The signifier potentially is having a little notice that tells you how to use it, but telling somebody how to use something maybe is less intuitive, is a bit more over the top. So I'm not quite sure how well this translates, but you know, let's go with it and see where we get to. Discoverability and feedback are far easier, I think, in terms of concept, and certainly the application to streets, I think, is easier for most people to grasp, including me. So with the push button, couple of things on discovery. The fact that it's a recognisable shape, at least in the UK, that particular arrangement, I'd imagine most people understand what it is and what it's for. The fact it's yellow probably helps a little bit from the side there. So we can discover where we have to go and push the button. I'd also say the tactile paving is important because there's many users that can't see or have difficulty seeing the push button. So the tactile paving, and if it's laid correctly in the correct arrangement, will direct people to the push button position. So two things there give you discoverability. On the right-hand side, we're talking about feedback. So you press a button, it lights up. There's your immediate feedback. You know the signals have got you programmed in for your green man. And then in the inset box there, you've got the twisted tactile cone that is underneath the push button unit. Now that gives you some feedback as a vision impaired user when it's actually safe to cross and the green man is showing. So slightly different on that feedback because that doesn't come into play until you actually get the green man. But you know, two sides of the same thing here, really. So we've got the discoverability. We're finding the thing in the street that we need to use somehow or negotiate, and we get some pretty immediate feedback there. Now this is probably even more complex. So zebra crossings, I would say generally speaking, whether it's this nice one all shiny in the City of London or a faded one in a supermarket without bleacher beacons and whatnot, it's still a pretty discoverable thing. Now, we have to learn these things as children, perhaps, but the zebra crossing is a thing that people recognise. There's studies and data that back that up. So in terms of discoverability, you look on the street, you see a zebra crossing, okay, fine, that's probably a good place to cross. Feedback is a bit more difficult because you don't get anything in terms of something lighting up or somebody telling you to start crossing. The feedback you're getting here probably is by virtue of drivers hopefully stopping to let you cross, even though technically speaking, you should have your foot on the crossing or the rest of that. There'll be some people that can't see or sense the traffic so well, and the feedback they get is a lot more difficult, which potentially is why there will be some people who prefer push buttons and signals and everything else. The affordance and signifier side of things, that's getting really difficult because kind of the affordance is not seen here. It's the fact that crossing is there it's meant to stop drivers to give that option to cross. Signifier is even more difficult here. So we've got this theory which applies very nicely to computers and phones and those products, maybe a bit more difficult to apply to streets, or maybe I just haven't been reading enough and trying to work it out in my head. Is what it is. So here's a bus gate. I think discoverability is fairly easy because if you're driving up there, you can see the no entry signs. Again, no entry signs are a learned thing, but if you see them in any country in the world, you probably understand what no entry means, unless you're in Ireland, which has kind of where we have band turns, the Irish have a band ahead. So we do have little differences here and there. The affordance and signifier is, again, it's probably a bit more esoteric with this one, but I've thrown those in as a question to think about. In terms of your feedback on this particular bus gate, if you decide not to obey the signs, you've got some pretty hefty feedback there. You're probably not going to do it again. If we go to something which is enforced in a slightly different way, again, discoverability, it's very bright, it's very obvious that this is a bus gate. We'll come to people understanding signs in a second, but again, pretty discoverable in the street. But maybe your feedback comes a lot later on this one when you get to find through the post for ignoring it. So the flying motorbike sign. the subject of debate forever on Twitter and other social media. People should understand the sign. It's been in the Big Book of Signs since 1964. People should understand it through doing the driving test and reading the Book of Signs and everything else. People keep getting it wrong. There's market research to show that people don't understand it. Lots of other signs which are banning things have a line through it, like a banned left turn or banned right turn or banned U-turn. There's quite a compelling argument that this should have a line through it, but at a greater distance, maybe it's harder to pick out the rest of the sign face. That's a debate which I'm probably not going to get into too much detail here. Suffice to say, if we've got a layout that people continually get wrong, there might actually be something wrong with the design. And really here, you can sit back in your chair and say, well, that's fine, we're just going to tax poor drivers. But if what we're trying to provide here is a method of trying to have a quieter street beyond, actually, we don't want people getting fined. We don't want anybody going there at all. So here's a really nice layout down in Lambeth in South London. It's a route where they've had to keep access open for emergency vehicles. They've decided here not to put in bollards that are removable for that purpose. So the sign is there on the left-hand side to actually reinforce the law. It's a legal requirement to have that particular sign. But through design, they've tried to discourage it as being a through road. So in order to drive through here, and I'm sure people give it a go, but they're much harder to say that they didn't understand the sign or they were confused, because you have to drive over what looks like a pavement. You have to weave your way past little planted gardens here to get beyond there. So what the designers have tried to do here is use design to reinforce the use and the behaviour in the street, and the sign's only there's a secondary thing to, because it's a legal requirement to have the sign on the site. So taking this a slight step further, and again, this is still me learning the subject a little bit. We're talking about user experience, but we can also call that human-centered design. And here's a 4-stage model here. So we can start by observing what's happening in the street. From what we observe, we can generate some ideas on how we can solve or enhance what we're seeing. And from that, we can then develop some prototypes and put them in the street maybe to test them. And as we're testing, we can go through this whole cycle again, and we can tweak and improve and change things as we go along. Might be on an individual project, or we might take that learning and apply it to a different situation. So let's look at a little example of that 4-stage model here. So here's some observation, traffic loops in the street, measuring traffic flow in a particular location. And yeah, not a massively busy street, but in terms of something like local transport, one of 20, where you're looking at cycle design, at about 2,000 vehicles a day, that's kind of the upper limit where people are happy to mix the traffic on 21-hour streets, for example. So we've got some flows here. We've got OGV1 and PSV, that's just lorries and buses. We've got some peak flows here. We've got speeds 29 miles an hour. Okay, so we've done some observation in terms of the traffic conditions, so we have a fair idea of what's going on. So we can then go and generate some ideas. This particular one, well, okay, look, we've got quite a lot of traffic coming through this residential street. Let's actually stop that through traffic. Carry letting cycles and pedestrians through, of course. So we've generated an idea. So here's a prototype. This example, sorry for the blurring, but that was the best photo I had. We've dropped some big concrete blocks in the road here. We've stuck a bollard in the middle to stop people driving through the middle. That can be removed for emergency access. But, we haven't spent a lot of money on this. We're trying it out, seeing what happens. So we're into the testing phase. We've now got the after traffic survey done. We've got a huge drop in flow through this particular road, not surprisingly, because we've stopped it here. So really the only people getting this far are those that have to be there. Yeah, massive reductions on peak flow as well. And actually we've achieved quite a good speed reduction for not actually doing very much at all. So that's the testing phase. In this particular example, we came back and actually put in the permanent materials here, but in fact, the permanent materials in this particular scheme are in a slightly different place. So actually, some of that testing is getting feedback from the public, and we made some adjustments to the project in its final layout. So that's where we've spent the money, when we're fairly sure we're happy with what the final scheme should look like. So trying to pull some of this together, and I haven't gone into affordances in this bit, I've kept it about the discovery and the feedback here. We're looking at self-explaining streets. So can we use the user experience ideas and human-centered design to design better streets? And this really, for me, is about having layouts which are discoverable. So as we're going through the street, doesn't matter if we're walking, wheeling, cycling, driving, whatever, we don't really need to have to think about what's expected of us. So we don't have to stop and study a sign to understand what we should do. In going forward, we should automatically understand how the street operates. And if we can get some feedback as we're using the streets, and it's comfortable feedback, so we're not going to crash into something the other side of a bus gate. If we keep that comfortable feedback, that helps reinforce that we're proceeding as we should. And yeah, if it gets a bit uncomfortable without damaging vehicles, that'll help with the feedback and yeah, re-educate people on how they should perhaps use those spaces. So I'm going to move to a little bit of research here, which is quite interesting, definitely worth reading. So University of West of England has been doing a fair bit of research actually on side roads and how people use them and how they operate. This particular part of this work by Flower Science and Parking looked at behaviour where people are walking and cycling over side roads versus driver behaviour. Again, link there for those who want to go and read the paper. It's quite accessible, definitely worth going to have a look. So what this particular paper does, it looks, again, more concepts coming in here, but they looked at two types of side road treatments. So here's an example of marked priority, giveaways here to a shared use path going across the entrance here. So you can see giveaway signs in the right places, so drivers give way to people walking and cycling. So as we're going along here, can we discover what's expected of us? Yes, probably, because at least if we're driving, we should know what those triangles, big triangles mean, and what the dotted lines mean. Do we get some feedback from this? That's a bit tougher. Maybe if we're going through there a bit quicker, we're not giving way properly, we'll encounter that speed hump. A bit of feedback there. If you're going there too quick and the guy cycling across and he fancies an argument, you might get some very immediate feedback from him. Less difficult to control though. Here's another example of marked priority. I would say this is probably a lot more obvious here with the parallel zebra crossing. Again, can we discover what's expected of us and what feedback do we get? So from the walking and cycling point of view, we know this is a place that we've got priority over traffic to cross. In theory, that should happen, and the feedback we get should be that people are actually stopping. Again, easier said than done in theory, but if we can design these streets to be as obvious as possible, if we can make sure that the drivers turning from that the road there is nice and tight and all that kind of thing, then hopefully they will discover what's expected of them. So that's marked priority. They also looked at design priority, and here we are, our favourite thing here, continuous treatment. This is Coventry. And the thing here is, if we go to discovery, the layout that we get is the change in level. We've got the materials in the ramp curb units there. We've got the red asphalt going across from a driving point of view. I would say from a discovery point of view, as somebody walking, wheeling or cycling, it may be less obvious because that priority hasn't carried on through with, you know, the footway curb running through and the dotted lines of the cycle track running through. So there's a bit of debate there about the discovery phase, but probably for the driver, it's going to at least make you slow down and encounter that space a bit more differently. Feedback again, as for marked priority, it's really the interactions between the people using that crossing there. So in the work that UWE did, so they were looking at yielding. So if you're crossing somewhere where, as a pedestrian or a cyclist, you're meant to have priority, you shouldn't have to yield to drivers turning in. That's kind of what they're looking at. So where you had marked priority junctions, the people crossing did not have to yield to drivers almost 3/4 of occasions, which is pretty high. A design priority junction, this goes up to nearly 90%, and that's compared with a control site where it's just a standard side road where, generally speaking, drivers would probably think they've got priority, notwithstanding the highway code. The control sites, that proportion was much less, below 50%. They did do some modelling of that, and it gets a little bit more complex on how they did that. But essentially, when they modelled design priority versus marked priority, they actually found that the parallel crossing might well be the preferred treatment, potentially because it's really, really obvious with the stripes and everything else, followed by design priority, followed by marked priority without zebra crossing. And that's that first example I gave of the give-way triangles. So it's very interesting how people see the road layout ahead, and based on what they see, decide how they should behave. So I shall leave you with a Norman door. Happy to answer questions, but as I say, this is not my subject, so maybe this will turn into more of a debate. Thank you very much, Steve.
Mark, that was excellent. Really, really good. I think at one point we hit peak active travel cafe there, where you were showing us saucy infrastructure, and Kathy put in the chat, nice curbs.
There we are. See, doesn't get better than that.
Doesn't get better than that. That's a Tuesday early evening well spent. Right, we've had quite a few questions in the chat. What I might do is just flag a couple of them, Mark, and then if people want to jump in and ask their question directly, because we had, first of all, a very straightforward one from Andy in Wiltshire, who was with us speaking earlier. What classification were the road streets with the concrete blocks bollards at the testing stage for an LTN? Technical question.
At what stage was it?
Yeah.
That was the start of an experimental traffic order. So we literally had a lorry that dropped the blocks on, traffic orders to back us up, and that was it. We were away.
Brilliant. There you go.
Dead easy.
Dead easy. So I'm going to ask, Ruth, you had two questions in the chat. Did you want to come in yourself and ask them? Because they're quite different ones. One about road safety and roadworks, another one about the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Mark. Thanks. Very interesting as usual. Road safety. So we've got loads of roadworks going on around Richmond, especially where they put nice new cycle lanes in and they're rebuilding them even though they're brand new. And to get past them, they've put no safe space to get past. So is there any mandatory thing that councils should be doing to make cycling safe when there are roadworks? Number one. And the other one was, in the Netherlands, they only have signs for where you can't park. No, where you can park, not where you can't. Do we have any chance of getting to that? Thank you.
So with the first one, yes, there is the code of practice for road and street works, which local authorities should be following and utility companies should be following. And that goes into lots of detail on how you make space for walking and cycling. It's a bit out of date because there is some cop-out clauses in there if it gets too difficult for them. But uniquely in London, there is also a separate document that TfL produced, which goes into a bit more detail. That's kind of mandatory on roads that TfL look after, gets a bit more difficult with the boroughs, but essentially they've still got responsibility to make sure that people are kept safe during works. The code of practice itself, and there was a really good question in the chat right at the beginning about the fact that it's a criminal offence not to comply with it and who might enforce that. But that tends to be local authorities. So if it's local authority works, they're playing policemen to their own works. But that's a political argument at the end of the day. On the second point, I have no idea if any politicians are thinking of going to that approach, but we can do that. So we can use restricted parking zones, which means we can designate an entire area and we can say, and within this entire area, essentially it's double yellow lines without the paint. We still have some signs and you can only park in marked bays. So we can do something approximately Dutch. just that we don't always bother. I've done quite a few that work well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So H, before I come to you, I'm just going to go to Matt Wardman, because Matt, you wanted to ask a quiet question, which is a lovely way of getting noticed in the chat. So Matt, did you want to come in? It's quieter than I expected, that question. No, shall I read it out? So Mark, the question that Matt had was about, I'm just scrolling through, Elizabeth, my list of questions you give me, was about a strange thing, an advertising board set halfway across a shared cycle walking pavement in Sheffield, and how could that possibly be allowed, and what's the law on there if somebody just chucks something up?
Oh, that's a good question. So at the basic level, people should not be putting anything on the highway. So in theory, there's enforcement action that can be taken about that. The problem is that you can license things on the highway, and lots of local authorities have seen income. And so what they've done essentially is brought in a policy of licensing these things. At one end of the scale, I believe it's still to be true, Edinburgh do not allow them at all. That's their policy. At the other end of the scale, there are councils that license all sorts of things for income. So if you're going to do it properly, you should have a policy in place. If something's put out and it's not in accordance with that policy, then obviously that can be enforced against. But also, and it goes for things perhaps a bit beyond advertising boards, you get into tables and chairs and other things. You get into the planning side of things where people need planning consent to have these things out in the first place. But for A boards, the question to go and ask of your local council is, what is your policy for them? If they haven't got a policy, they really should be taking enforcement action and getting shot at them. If they have got a policy, it's making sure those things are deployed in accordance with that policy.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. And I now know Matt couldn't jump in because quiet meant he doesn't have a microphone that works. So there you go.
Fair enough.
In fact, I found the ugliness that, in fact, I can share it. If I just share what, can everybody see that on Twitter?
Yeah. Oh, one of these ones. That's even
worse. One of those ones.
So that's even worse because, yeah, so that would be an advertising company or a phone company putting those in. So for those to go in, they do require planning consent, but it's a slightly different class of planning consent, and it's often quite difficult for local authorities to resist them. So if your local authority, one of those has been proposed where you haven't got enough footway space, or if it's there on a shared path, really the planning officers, in conjunction hopefully with the highways officers, should be objecting to those, and then the planning authority essentially refusing planning consent for those. The advertising industry is well funded, has lots of money, lots of power, so they routinely appeal. So if you can pin those back to local policy, whether it's active travel policy within planning terms or immediacy or other things, that's what they should do. The problem is now it's in, you're pretty much going to fail to get those removed again because they're very, very lucrative. I used to work with planners. We routinely rejected them in that kind of position, but yeah.
Craziness. Okay, I'm going to come to Cameron in just a second because he's got probably one of our final questions. But H, you've had your hand up very patiently. Did you want to come in on this? I can see he's pushing buttons. He may appear or not.
He needs to pick up his mouse and talk to it.
Human-centered design in the world of H.
There. No, he's
H, you there?
You're muted again.
Yeah, have I got me now?
Yes.
Yep, yes. Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, basically, picking up on Ranty, there is quite often our council has a blanket permission for bus shelters, and we actually had a bus shelter put in where you couldn't get between the bus shelter and the wall on the footway. So that's where these things go in. And we have an instance in Oldgate where Andrea Casalotti there was a fatality where a person stepped out in front of a bus because the bus driver didn't see them. They didn't see the bus coming, and they thought the lights were red to go up Commercial Street. So these things are lethal, and they've got a blanket permission to put them in. The other one, I was going to ask Mark about bollards versus car traps. There is a nice video of a car, I think it's in Cambridge, where the driver attempts to go along the busway and there is a car trap and he punctures all his tyres by driving into the car trap. What do you think of those, the drop roads?
Oh, the problem with all this is we probably don't want people getting in there in the first place, because if they do get in there and into a trap, then it's going to hold everybody up until they can actually get the vehicle recovered. I think Cambridge is interesting because there's a couple of locations where, despite lots and lots and lots of signs, people are continually getting it wrong. I think there's one up near Ely End where there's a couple of accesses to private properties, so they have to keep some sort of road open. But people keep disobeying the signs. That's a problem. If you keep getting these things going wrong, can you go back and look at the design and try and design that problem out in the first place? Otherwise, what you've got to do potentially is rising bollards or barriers, which then come with a maintenance liability. Traps are passive. They sit there, do nothing until somebody crashes into one. So, yeah, I guess they're cheap from that point of view.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Cameron, did you want to come in and ask your question yourself? I'm happy to read it out for you, but if you want to jump in, I thought your point about agile software development and iterative design is quite interesting. This.
Yeah, can you hear me? So yeah, I was just saying it's very similar to agile development in software design, where you're developing very close with in close conjunction with the user, and then you're releasing a minimum viable product on an iterative basis, getting feedback, improving it, and so on. And I guess, like for in the civil engineering environment, there's not that many parallels where you can do that, apart from with like ETROs and LTNs and so on. I'm just thinking it's absolutely essential, really, that we can still continue to do that type of thing, but with the DFT, having potential additional requirements to get local buy-in and so on. How would you advise local authorities to ensure they get buy-in and still be able to trial solutions? Is there a different process required, to sort of like outline up front and say, that we're yeah. Anyway, I'll let you on.
I think with the caveat that I haven't bothered to read the latest drivel that's come out from them, because life's too short. Lots of people have read it, and lots of people are saying, look, all they're doing is kind of re-upping the kind of things that good local authorities do anyway. So let's not worry about that too much. Until and unless they change the regulations around how you deploy experiments, we're still free to go and do them. And experiments have a 6 months objection period written into the law, which is your feedback and trying to get the local buy-in and the rest of it. So I would say, and with the caveat that that who knows what they're going to do in the next week or whatever. Why not do experiments? Because that's a really good way of getting that immediate feedback. You can tweak things as you go and everything else. As I said, so I don't think that should necessarily change. It's probably just going to put the waivers off from doing that kind of thing. I think the difference you've got between, say, software design or product design, which things are agile, can move quickly, is street stuff is slower. We can deploy things as we did in COVID. Again, subject to the legal caveats there. We can go and try stuff out. We should try stuff out, because if you wanted to go and put in a big plaza in the middle of some town, maybe spending a bit of money doing the experiment, doing some engagement, getting feedback and buy-in and everything else is better than spending £2, £3, £4 million complete repaving the area. So it's definitely got its place. I think it necessarily is a lot more clunky. We can probably go and try stuff in quieter, less controversial places, get the learning from that, and then deploy it under a slightly larger, more complex scheme. So there's definitely stuff we can learn from the more agile industries. It's just we are hamstrung to some extent with the law, but also the law is there to protect people's right of access to premises and loading and other things. So there is a reason for that. But yeah, it's a good parallel to draw.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Really good analogy. Now, I can't see any more hands up. The only thing that occurred to me, Mark, through all of that is how you're at some points talking about iterative designs or using signage systems from the 1960s coupled with things that we're just experimenting with. And in some ways, I did wonder whether in your heart of hearts, would you like to be able to start the whole thing from scratch?
I think, it's an interesting question. So actually, if we were looking at filters, that's the best example. And this is probably why I constantly say, let's only put camera enforced filters in where absolutely necessary by exception. Because if we put bollards in, then you get immediate feedback as a user. So if you're a driver, you see the bollard, you know you can't get through. You don't have to have a sign, you don't have to have any explanation whatsoever. So if we go back to what I was saying, so the usability signal, going right back to the early slide, the usability signals of the filter is, okay, look, you've got the bollard there, you kind of understand how you use that thing. The discoverability is there, you can see a bollard in front of you. The feedback is immediate, you can't pass in a car. So I think it's kind of fine to talk about, yeah, maybe we need a slightly different sign. There will be people that come back with a new market tested sign that still don't understand it. And I think this is a problem. Trying to rely on traffic signs is almost a failure of design in the first place. And I'd rather be using traffic signs to reinforce the law because we have to, but actually get the design right. So that Lambeth example I gave where it's, yeah, I probably shouldn't be driving through there. That's far better than just putting a couple of signs up by the side of roads. Even the bus gates, bright red painted on the ground, people go through it because they don't understand what it is. So can we use the design to make things really, really understandable? Because as I say with these things, what we're really after is high compliance, especially if it's a safety critical situation. We don't want people going through there. We don't actually want people on our busways. We don't want people in the filters. Let's try and design that out.
Brilliant, Mark. A perfect note upon which to end. Also, I think they might look prettier and more aesthetically pleasing. So there you go. Well, I'm going to round us up and send us all on our way to go and have our tea. That was an amazing one. Mark, thank you so much. Excellent news roundup as well. It sounds like everything exciting appears to be happening in Scotland. Who knew? We're all on a, we're going to come up, Brendan, visit Edinburgh straight away because there's nothing happening south of the border, frankly. Thank you very much to all our speakers. Thank you to Elizabeth and Will for helping out. And please do join us again next week on Active Travel Cafe. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Take care.